Well, hello there, guys. It's the end of the week. It's a beautiful, gorgeous day out there in Northern California on a Friday. Coming to you from our neck of the woods, and I am dropping another end of the week Dungeons and Dragons noob DM uh, video. And last time we were talking about DDO, Dungeons and Dragons Online, which is the popular MMO, which is still going and was created by the Turbine game developers back in 2006, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And we were going over the DDO classes and races. Now, we barely scratched the surface on that, so I'm going to return to that later and go over finish talking about the DDO races and DDO classes because I have been playing some DDO of late. Specifically, when I found out there was hardcore events going on, and admittedly, I didn't really get into it too much. I was a little Johnny come lately on that because I thought it was a permanent server, but it turns out that it was not. It's a seasonal thing that DDO has from time to time. Um, Unfortunately, also our my 5E local 5E campaign has ground to a halt because the COVID situation is not getting any better. Um, I'm fully vaccinated, but there are breakthrough cases, so I don't feel really comfortable as an older person sitting around at a table with younger folks who may or may not be vaccinated, although they're all wearing a mask. So you know how that goes. So until the numbers drop back down, then it's possible that I'm only going to be playing DDO, unfortunately, and I'm still trying to set up another online campaign. So I'll talk about that at a later time because today I want to focus on doing part two of our brief examination of the basic D&D basic set rule set. Last time we were talking about commonly known as Moldvay because that's the name of the editor that worked on this back in 1981, if I'm not mistaken. So last time we talked about the basic rule book, and this time we're gonna take a quick look at the expert rules, which was the second set. Now I only personally only own the first two. I don't have the companion or the masters or the immortal because I wasn't really playing basic, and I since I wasn't running a campaign or even playing one, I didn't see any point of actually getting all of them. But you know, they're not. It depends. They're not hard to come by. You definitely kind of gonna have to spend some coin to get it. I think the expert set I saw it go as high as $50 and more if it's in good condition. I think I paid way less for my copy, but which I was happy about. But they're not hard to find, but they're not also terribly easy to come by. And unfortunately, you're not gonna find them cheap most of the time because that's how it goes with some of these older edition modules and rule sets. So be aware of that if you want to go ahead and get into Moldvay. But let's go. But at any rate, let's get into what makes this expert set, what it contains, and what makes it special. A while back ago, I saw a poll that said that this is still one of the favorites, if not the favorite edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's easy to see why people still love. I would say, yeah, love this edition. And so we'll take a look at the expert set and talk a little bit about the pre first um edition of Dungeons and Dragons today. All right, all right, guys. I'm gonna have to make a slight correction. I was looking at the correction to my intro here on the expert rule book. I was looking at the front cover, inside cover, and I realized now that Moldvay only edited the the first book. This expert rule book was actually written by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, Dave Gygax and Arneson, the famous D&D creators of the D&D game, and it was edited though by David Cook with help from Steve Marsh. So this is actually the Cook expert rulebook, which came in the expert set for basic. as far back as 1974, actually, and it just got reprinted and adjusted. The latest version was dated 1981. So, as I mentioned, 1981, but these rules were in existence as back as 1974 when D&D was brand new or fairly new, um, if you don't count the white box and all that stuff. So, um, let's talk about this rule set. So, what is different or what does it contain? Well, one thing that's different is it does go into the wilderness campaign. You know, and a wilderness campaign um, is a challenging, especially back then, was also a challenging thing to for the dungeon master to run, because they prior to this, you know, it was more dungeon crawl, more focused on going into a dungeon or going into a monster lair or something along those lines. But there wasn't really open world wilderness terrain type um, campaign. And this set pretty much provides, or this rule book pretty much provides the tools for a dungeon master to run a wilderness campaign. Now, in first edition, they did go ahead and put out some books. The Wilderness Campaign Guide, for example, and the Dungeoneering Guide, which kind of did the same thing and expanded on these rules. But this was the first time that I can recall that there were some rules laid out for how to run a wilderness campaign. Uh, it talks about how although a party can be guided to a desired area by hints, the dungeon master must be ready to make up minor details on the spot as needed. In the wilderness, there will seldom be time to heal completely between encounters, and valuable equipment cannot be easily replaced. So that was one thing that it offered dungeon masters as well as players. Um, So you had a higher level characters because I believe that the Moldvay book was for early levels, and this book, being the expert set rules, goes all the way up to like I think it goes to like 12, 14 levels, depends on the character class, but I think it goes higher than 10th level for sure. Um, for example, the clerics go up to 14. Um, the dwarves go to 12. Elves go up to 10. The world level restrictions, so depending on what kind of class you were playing, you could only reach a specific level. You couldn't go beyond that, which was a feature of the early game. It was later changed, of course, in editions. Unless you were a human, for some reason, the humans could pretty much go higher. Um, but the fighters, for example, were up to level 14, which is what this book covers. So it pretty much looks like most of the classes were capped at level 14. Um, and one thing that I talked about when I was discussing Moldvay, of course, is how the early version of the game did not really differentiate between classes and races. So the races and the classes were kind of mixed in. So if you were a cleric, you were playing a human, for example. And if you're a dwarf, that's what you are. There's no such thing as a dwarf cleric in basic in this rule set. Um, there are elves and fighters and halflings, which are like hobbits, basically. They didn't call them hobbits. And then you got the thieves, which nowadays we call the rogue. But they were thieves back then. And prior to first edition, where they had the subclasses, um, you could only be a thief. That's pretty much what you had. Um, so that's something that was offered. Basically, the ability to have higher level characters. And also, when it came to alignments, the alignment system was pretty much in use, but the alignment system in Cook and this basic, they were basically just three alignments. So you were either lawful or chaotic and neutral. So you couldn't be any lawful evil, any of that stuff didn't exist. They basically broke it down to three alignments. The lawful, which were characterized by um, respect for rules, willingness to put the benefit of the group ahead of the benefit of individuals. And then the chaotic characters, of course, is the opposite of lawful. Chaotic is selfish and respects no laws and rules, and chaotics cannot be trusted. And then, you're neutral, you're neither one, you just kind of got split in the middle. and your goal is to have person to survive. Basically, you're concerned with personal survival according to the book, um, and you will do whatever is in your character's best interest, with little thought or regret about what happens to the rest of the party, which um, is still followed through in the first edition and later editions, except like I said, they expanded on the alignment system. I remember one of the first appendix, I think it's in the first edition player's handbook, if I'm not mistaken, like in back chapters where there's like a whole wheel. The first time I saw the wheel of alignment, so you have lawful good and you had, chaotic good and all that stuff. And depending on the monsters too, the monsters had their alignment, and that's how they would, how the DM would role play them, and a lot of their actions were guided by alignment, which I think it's a great system. And I've heard talk of later, newer editions of the game after fifth edition and beyond, where they're trying to take away or minimize that part of the game, which I think is would be a terrible, terrible mistake, or a really bad addition, or a bad um, adjustment, or whatever you want to call revision. I guess it would be a bad revision, because it really, yes, you can still role play without the alignment system, but the alignment system, I think, adds so much adds so much of more layers to the RPG, the role playing aspect of the which has made the game so great over the years. Maybe I'm an old fogey that likes the old system, but I think that because people could argue, well, 5e has the backgrounds, and so depending on your class, your race, and your background, then you have pretty much a tailor made template, if you will, for how to role play or how you want your character to behave. And anyway, you shouldn't be sort of guided too much unless you're a cleric, because if you're a cleric, you're gonna follow your god, and your god has specific moral issues. But I think I can do a whole video, and I have seen videos on YouTube now, and I think about it, talking about the importance of the alignment system, how the alignment system adds so much more to the game in terms of the morality of your character, and how you conduct yourself in uh, in the world, and what actions you take, all that kind of good stuff. So anyway, sorry to go on a tangent there, but there were only three alignments basically when we first started out, and it has been expanded since. Um, a lot of tables giving the titles. That's another thing that the basic edition had. I think they carried this into first edition too, where you have a title by level. For example, the magic user, a first level magic user is known as a medium, strangely enough. And then the second is a seer. So you don't really get more well-known titles until a higher level or middle of the range. Sixth level could be a witch, a warlock, or a witch, depending on your gender. Um, and seventh level is a sorcerer, and the wizard is level 9 and above. So it's really interesting to see how those titles have actually become sub races now, where starting with first edition, definitely into second edition and beyond, you're getting more. You're it's basically not a title anymore. It's actually a sub race, and there's different things that a sorcerer can do versus what a wizard can do. They call them magic users here because there was only one class or one classes and races were the same. If you're playing a magic user, basically you cast spells. That's what you do, and you're not really powerful at the first level. You're a medium because you don't need a lot of experience. But by the time you get to like level 10, which is where this expert rule set kind of kicks in, you're definitely a powerful caster with more hit dice and all those other bonuses. So really simple set, you guys. The one thing I really like about this a basic, and I want to run a basic adventure at some point as a noob DM, because I never have, and I never even engaged in it as a player. I started with first edition, as many of you will recall if you follow this channel. But I think that it's just so the simplicity of it, the whole kiss factor, keep it simple, stupid. Really applies to basic, as I guess it's in the name. It's a basic game. It was even before we got into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and that's the reason why we called it Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for so many years, because it expanded on these rules. But I think that having like a medium of range where it's not too crunchy and it's not too basic is sort of what they were always aiming for. But at this early level, late 70s, um, early 80s, when the game was not as nearly as popular or as mainstream as it is now, and they were just getting their foot really into what it was trying to shape what the hobby was going to be and what RPGs were going to be all about, especially D&D, that they went really basic. And I don't know if Gygax or Artisan even at this point of the game even had plans for AD&D, where they I think it started through the tournament play, where they had like the modules were for more advanced levels, so they just kept adding to it. But I just love the simplicity of this system, and I think that's why it's still popular today, because a lot of older players do too. Um, let's see what else is on this. There's a bunch of spells. Almost half the rule book, like a lot of these rule sets, have to do with the more spells. So they add to the basic spells that you had in the first book. Um, and you have higher level spells, of course, because it's the expert set. Um, and then it doesn't uh, get into the adventure rules until part 4. This book is divided into 9 parts. So part 4 is part 3 is the spells. Part 4 is the adventure itself. So he talks about how to organize a party, how to put together maps, um, time and scale and movement, um, and all kinds of travel by water, travel by air, the kind of things that, like I said, they would expand upon in first edition. But in first edition, they had whole rule books, telling you how to do some of these things, or they were included in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Um, then the fifth part 5 of the book talks about the encounter, so that's where they get into combat, um, which is really interesting because it kind of the first book touched upon combat, but this expands on that in terms of saving throws, um, unarmed combat. So, what do you do if you don't have any weapons at your disposal? How do you run that? Morale. Now, morale is really interesting to me because morale is something that is not a feature or a part of the later editions of the game, but it did exist back then. And I think it's a great thing, and I think they should bring it back. And basically, and I think that if I when I run a fifth edition or fourth, whatever, a later edition of D&D, I'm going to try to incorporate morale rules into that, if the players agree, because basically what it was if you're fighting like a monster, like a group of, let's say your party encounters a group of monsters, a group of opponents, and you start winning fights. They had fights that were of epic level scale, and I think fourth edition tried to do this, but it wasn't really successful because it was too much in some people's eyes. It was too much like video game combat, where you have you had the three utility, if you remember fourth edition at all, utility powers and daily powers and encounter powers. So everybody pretty much had something to contribute. Like in this edition of the game, for example, in basic, the magic users on first level are not that powerful. I think they have like one spell or no spells at all. So they can use one spell and then wait the rest of the encounter. Some people didn't like that. I think it's somewhat realistic. So you would not have your magic user or your wizard type character or your caster up in the front. You would have them in the back. And then, if you wanted to turn the tide of a battle, it was going maybe tight, then they can cast a spell and heal characters that are wounded, that type of stuff. So, but in fourth edition, it was more combat heavy, and it's more like a massive. They tried to do this massive battle things, which are incorporated in first and second edition. Um, Only that it wasn't as they weren't as successful at incorporating that part into the game. So sorry, the power was kind of going down, so the power saver kicked in, kind of interrupted my train of thought. Um, but I was going over the some of the differences in the expert rules book, and we're talking about combat, how it differs, and morale, the morale system. So basically, the morale system, if you were in a tie in a battle, and you were winning the battle, sometimes the monsters would basically get discouraged, you know, and run away. Their morale would go down, and it's so realistic to me. I was like, that is such a brilliant thing to bring up during the combat that we don't have in the modern edition that I'm going to definitely incorporate when I homebrew a campaign because depending how the tide is going, you get discouraged and the monsters are not going to be always be wanting to finish out if they're getting clobbered, so they'll run away if to fight another day, and that makes total sense to me, and I think that's um, a great mechanic that they should bring back into the game, and which was available, or it was a feature of the basic expert set and the basic set. You know, then the rest of the book talks about treasure. There's a lot of treasure here in potions, scrolls, rings, wands, miscellaneous magic. There's a whole section about miscellaneous magic items, which is great. And then you have your dungeon master information in the last part of the book, like part 8, where he talks about handling player characters, magical research and production, creating an NPC party, NPC magic items, things like that. Things that they would later incorporate in other modules, other rule sets, and the first edition for sure would have books. The Dungeon Master's Guide for first edition. I have to say, one day I'll have to do a whole video about it because it is a great source book, and I still refer to it even today because it was so well done. But some of the stuff would come later on, and then the last part, which is part 9, is the special adventures where he talks about the rules for waterborne adventures, ships. There were some modules. I'm thinking of like the in fifth edition they incorporated some of the old modules, which had ship combat and waterborne adventures. There's some of that in the later editions, but fifth edition, for example, has the Ghost of Saltmarsh, and the Ghost of Saltmarsh is like this whole beautiful campaign or book but they're the old modules from first edition and just updated them to 5e, but it's basically the same adventures. And so it started here, guys. It started way back in 1974, all the way up to early 80s. Encounters at sea and combat at sea. So that pretty much wraps up um, what's in the fantasy the expert rule book from the Cook edition for basic. I can't wait to play it. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to run a basic adventure uh, in person or online in sometime in the future. I do, but that's all I have. We have for today. I have for you guys today. I do have a Patreon open, so I'll always leave the link in the description. So if you want to help out the channel financially, I would love that because there are going to be some perks. It'll help me create more of these type of videos if you enjoy them. Um, and you'll have some. I will incorporate some perks. I'm thinking of doing a giveaway early next month or middle of next month after I get some of these videos pushed out, so you can look out for that if you're a patron. Also, I'm gonna put together a survey monkey, and the survey monkey will be kind of like viewer input. If you're a subscriber, you can input what direction you want to see. I noticed that I get a lot of feedback and a lot of participation from when I talk about these old modules, and I talk about what is featured in some of the old books on the old edition versus like for example the second edition versus fifth edition discussion. I think still the highest in terms of like views and feedback on the channel. So I'll have the survey, and I know I talk about Dungeons and Dragons Online because the MMO relates to DDO relates to that. Maybe Neverwinter, or maybe you don't want to see content for I do have pushed that onto my RPG blog or retro MMO blog which I also will have a link on the description. But you guys let me know. This is our channel together to engage in our favorite hobby, discussions about our favorite hobby, and Dungeons and Dragons. Every edition of D&D here every week. So thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, you know, check out, continue playing, whether it's online or in person, and I'll talk to you guys very soon. Thank you.